Being queer is a problem of subtlety. Not subtle enough, and you risk losing your family, your life, and your place in the world. Too subtle, and, well, you risk missing out on your family, your life, and your place in the world. It's a tightrope. A balancing act. The tie I'm wearing in this shot isn't subtle. I think it was around $7. And the shirt underneath was probably cheaper. It was either from a thrift store or a gift from a family member. And I honestly don't know because I've had it since I've stopped growing. And the bra is brand new, actually. It's probably the most expensive part of this outfit, but I can never really seem to find one that fits. They don't really make one for my body type. I'm always rolling my shoulders and furtively pinching at the bottom of the cups, trying to pull everything back into order. I don't pass, and I don't attempt to. At this point, I think I'm content with just signaling. I don't mind if a non-queer person calls me a man because they were never going to get it in the first place. I'm definitely not subtle, and neither is this. Theodore Logan is a man conditionally accepted by his father, frequently chastised for his close relationship with another man who also happens to share his complete ignorance of his own history. The threat of Ted's fathers is to send Ted away to a military school and to make him more like him. There's a lot of pronouns in that sentence, but I think you get my meaning. And, of course, to separate him from Bill. I think it's interesting how the first time in the film we see Ted talk to Bill about Oates Military Academy, it is with the context of their separation. Ted's father, of course, doesn't understand that the future hinges quite literally on Bill and Ted. He is more concerned with ensuring that Ted fits with the rest of society, and, of course, fits into an ideal of masculinity that he constructs. Ted, of course, doesn't want that. He wants to be loud, he wants to be seen, and he wants to cast off subtlety. This adventure begins at a Circle K, where they see themselves from the future and are assured, if momentarily, that their future can be bright. They're hesitant at first to trust the other versions of themselves, but their story begins when they ask why they would lie to themselves. After a brief visit to 18th century France, they quickly ditch Napoleon Bonaparte, someone who was historically famous for masculine insecurity. The first place they visit of their own agency is a bar where their identity is not questioned. Even after breaking the rules of this micro-society as established, they are celebrated as equals in the culture. They are chased out of town because that's what this culture would do to anyone who acted like them. Despite being literally chased out, they are not outsiders. They then visit Socrates, where they learn, quote, "The only true wisdom consists of knowing that you know nothing."
That's us, dude!
Thus reinforcing their ignorance of their own history. They travel to medieval times, Ted finds love when he lets down his armor, and of course, that nearly gets them both killed, but when they're saved, they find themselves in this underground community where they belong intrinsically. Although ignorant, they are welcome outsiders. Bill and Ted pick up 8 different historical figures. Of those, Billy the Kid is speculated to have possibly had relationships with men, Socrates was a Greek, Freud studied human sexuality, and Joan of Arc was known to cross-dress. They are collecting a small group of potential queers, and they seem to like Bill and Ted a lot. They love the society that they come from, even if superficially. And part of what I think is happening here is that Bill and Ted are constructing their own history. It's not uncommon for queer people to have no historical knowledge of their community before, to choose, let's say, an arbitrary example, something like the Stonewall riots, because records of marginalized genders and sexualities have been all but scrubbed from the history books, with perhaps the exception of our participation in civil rights movements. And this would have been especially true in the late 80s when this takes place. Bill and Ted are 2 boys who don't know where they fit in. They do their best to be seen so that maybe their place in the world will come to them, and wouldn't you know it, it actually does. It's by no means a new read to say that The Matrix is the story of a transgender person. There can only be so many video essays that play the director's heart-wrenching suicide poetry over a scene of their main character being thrown onto a set of subway tracks before I think we all kinda get it. But for the uninitiated, Neo is living two lives. In one, he is Thomas A. Anderson, program writer for a respectable software company. He has a social security number, he pays his taxes, and he helps his landlady carry out her garbage. The other life is lived in computers, where he goes by the hacker alias Neo. Now, Neo understands that there is something wrong with the way things are. It's the same sort of double life that is reality for most, if not all, transgender people. He goes on to meet Trinity, someone he assumes was a man, and is reminded that a lot of men make that assumption. He takes a pill, finally understands what's wrong with the world, changes his name, and has that respected by those in actual reality. Neo is even described by the architect of the Matrix as a rounding error, something that must be eliminated in order for the binary system to function properly. He is overt in his rejection of the Matrix and its rules. And there's no real use in continuing to decode transgender symbolism in the Matrix. Suffice to say that after leaving the Matrix, Neo's existence is less binary. And all of this is well-trod ground. Instead, I want to talk about what Neo loses because of his double life. In the first film, much of the crew of the Nebuchadnezzar is killed right after the Oracle tells Neo he is not the one. It's also this moment of doubt that gets Morpheus kidnapped, that brings the entirety of Zion closest to its extinction. People die when Neo doubts his identity. And Neo is literally brought back to life when he accepts himself for who he is. He is most powerful and near unkillable when he denies the title Mr. Anderson, resurrected as a new man. It's a little on the nose for a Christ metaphor, but perhaps subtle enough for... well... I want to point out that Neo is miserable as Thomas Anderson. In fact, Thomas Anderson nearly jumps off of a building to escape their double life. And I think one of the most interesting parts of Neo's story is the end. He dies and is martyred by becoming part of the machine. He is a glitch in the program, a non-binary rounding error, and it kills him to become a part of it. John Wick has a short history of showing people in positions of power as those cast aside by society. In the two most recent films specifically, those approaching John in terms of power have been homeless, disabled, and, with the release of Parabellum, openly, if subtly, queer. And it's easy to write these off as token roles, a concession given to marginalized people, and not a whole lot more. Maybe an easy way to bring in ticket sales from socially conscious individuals. Except that isn't really what John Wick has ever been after. Chad Stahelski doesn't hit the press junket bragging about the first openly gay character in the John Wick cinematic universe. The Adjudicator is subtle. The John Wick franchise is about systems and how they control us. John and the rest of the assassins under the high table are controlled by a system that is, on its face, completely ridiculous. John saves his own life at one point in the third film by putting 3 fingers over the threshold of the Continental Hotel, having in the second film had the privilege of no business on Continental grounds revoked less than a week earlier, and at the end of the film, having that privilege once again arbitrarily revoked when it suits the needs of those with more power. No killing on the Continental, and yet the most effective attempt on Mr. Wick's life happens on Continental grounds. It's been proven by the system's highest and lowest members that the system is entirely arbitrary. It flexes to fit the needs of whoever holds the most power. The Adjudicator, despite what they may have you think, never has the most power. It's always John. The Adjudicator gets their power from following the rules, John gets his power from breaking them. The Adjudicator must do what is expected of them, John does not. It's also interesting to note that the Adjudicator is never given a name, something incredibly important to many genderqueer people. The Adjudicator is defined by their role in the system. I also don't think it's coincidental that they happen to be styled after what the average, if perhaps socially conscious person might picture when the words non-binary come up. John is allowed to exist outside of the bounds of the rules that guide him. He is shown to be given chance after chance after chance. He carries his gun openly and is very often picked out in crowds. The adjudicator, on the other hand, is far more subtle. In a system that is willing to flex in order to accommodate those with most power, I find it unsurprising that it is unwilling to flex for them. In simpler language, the adjudicator must conform to the system that defines them in order to keep an amount of power, when that same system is shown to be flexible for others. John is free at the beginning of his story because he exists outside of the system. He is given that privilege by those within it. That privilege is also taken away from him as what he perceives to make him a man is also taken away. His wife, and, perhaps a little on the nose, man's best friend. John cannot exist within the system because he refuses to conform to its rules. Simultaneously, John cannot exist outside of the system because he is not allowed by the people that control it. So, John breaks the system. John is less subtle. He ends the most recent film having had the system take advantage of him, near death, and out on the street because of it. With the exception of The Matrix, I think it would be a bridge too far to call the work of Keanu Reeves explicitly, textually queer in its design. It is, in all likelihood, pure coincidence that queer stories can be read into some of his most iconic works. However, Ted Logan is a man conditionally accepted by his biological father who seems to be unconditionally accepted by a constructed family. He constructs a history beyond the history books because none is given to him. Neo is a man who the system must assimilate or kill in order to continue functioning as a binary. To die and to become a part of the system are one and the same for him. John Wick is a man who is constantly trying to escape the system that binds him. He is overt in his masculinity, he is seen, and for that he cannot live inside or outside of the system. These, in my opinion, are a series of very queer predicaments, and indeed, a problem of subtlety. I've been Matty Girlmeat. I'll be seeing you.
California Valley boys, the very best of friends. They used to go on dates with girls, but now they don't pretend. After trying to deny it, they went ahead and tried it. Couldn't believe how excellent it felt. It's no bogus journey, it's their heart's